Hello there guys and welcome back. As you can tell from the title and thumbnail of this video, I kinda have a major hot take about this show. One must be thinking, this guy must be a contrarian. Everyone's been saying that this show is good, and that is correct. The second part, that is. Just about everyone on the internet has been singing the show's praises, whether it's professional or YouTube critics, fans of Fallout, even the original creator of the franchise himself, Tim Kaine. Even for a brief period, some people complained about this show's ramifications for New Vegas, which we're definitely getting into, but just about the whole conglomerate of people who watched the show liked it. But there is one guy who didn't, and you're looking at him. Okay, that's just lying, since there's a few people I've seen that have been critical of the show. There's Mahler's recent review, which I thought was pretty good, as well as Enclave Emily's. Even Chris Avallone, the guy who worked on Fallout 2 and New Vegas, has also had a few things to say about it. This last one's important because I've seen plenty of people use Tim Kaine liking the show to ward off any criticism. For one, I could easily use Avallone as my example, so if you try saying that his opinion doesn't count, you're being hypocritical. You're using Kaine as your shield against any criticism, so by that logic, it should work both ways. Two, as an appeal to authority, which means that just because somebody worked on or even created a piece of work, it isn't a written law of the universe that it's good. Hope I've made that clear. As for my sense on Fallout as a whole, for those who might be wondering, I love the originals. Even as someone who never grew up with them, or for the games to be at an age where it's pretty hard for modern players to get into them, I still love them and I will continue to do so. As for New Vegas...
This right here is my favorite thing, ever. In the history of forever. I think about this every day. I think about this all night long. I stay awake, not sleeping, because I'm thinking about this.
I think that should speak for itself. I'm not a fan of how Bethesda has treated the franchise. I've played 3, 4, I didn't like either of those. And while I haven't played 76 yet, I doubt I'll like that one as well, despite that some people claim that that game is good now. I think that they misunderstand the tone and the themes of the series, they made them into something that they're not. And I don't think that they hold up as games themselves for other reasons, but this is not a critique of those games, but I'll make sure you understand my problems with them by the time the day is done. This show unfortunately continues the trend those games have set, and it's pretty evident that those were the ones this show takes the majority of its inspiration from, outside being set in the west coast of the US, which we're certainly going to get into. And just to make it super crystal clear now, it is confirmed that this show is canon to the game series and not an adaptation that takes place in its own continuity. If that were the case, lore inconsistencies would be way more forgivable. That wouldn't fix every single problem the show has, since it's also not good on its own merits as well. So this is what this video is about, pointing out all the flaws the show has, and the reason why it shouldn't be canon to the Fallout games, and why it's nowhere near as good as what many have claimed that it is. As well as to why the show has gotten such a positive reception, and what that could mean for future seasons of the show, or even the franchise as we know it. But if you still disagree with my stance, just let me know so we can discuss it. Civilly, of course. But this video isn't to say that you're wrong for personally liking the show or having fun with it, but to instead point out why the show isn't very well written, and why I think we should be more critical of it. I doubt this video is going to set the world on fire or anything, but I'll do my best to make my case. So with all that out of the way, let's drop some nukes straight into this. To start on episode 1, The End, we're on the day the Great War happened, October 23rd of 2077. In case you're wondering, I will be explaining quite a bit of Fallout lore in this video for those whose introduction to the franchise to the show, or those who may not be quite familiar with the lore, especially from the originals, since many fans still haven't played them. We have famous actor Cooper Howard and his daughter Jenny, who are guests for a kid's birthday party in Los Angeles. Starting off positively, the set and prop designers of the show weren't messing around, because this show recreates the Fallout aesthetic wonderfully, I think. Everything has this retro 50s sci-fi look and feel to it, and I'm all down for that. Everything looks pretty good, and you can tell they paid a lot of attention to the look and feel of the franchise. Too bad they didn't pay that much attention to the lore and stories, but once again, that's getting ahead of ourselves. The show is pretty well made for the most part, and it doesn't look like a low-effort CW show, unlike some other adaptations of a beloved game series that had a similar budget. Mr. Spencer wants Cooper to do his iconic thumbs up for this kid's picture, which is another setup for another flashback scene that happens later on, so wait for that scene before I provide more commentary. Cooper declines, much to the confusion of his daughter. Mr. Spencer has a conversation with his friend that Cooper is doing this to pay his alimony for his ex-wife, setting up what causes their split up, which is answered, stupidly, in episode 8. I have a question about this scene. What time of the day is it? In Fallout 4 in Massachusetts, it's clearly still early in the morning when the bombs drop. no later than about 9 o'clock. I ask this because Massachusetts is in the Eastern time zone, and California is in the Pacific time zone, which is 3 hours behind. Now, I don't know about you, and I'm pretty sure that most kids tend to have their parties until the afternoon, and that's what it appears that this scene is set in. The reason I'm bringing this up is because this is a blatant inconsistency with the time represented in Fallout 4. I know that the bombing of the world happens in about 2 hours, which is explained in the opening narration of Fallout 1, but even that doesn't explain this discrepancy. So for those who claim that this show is 100% consistent with the lore, we already have a problem. Granted, this isn't the biggest deal in the world, but this is indicative of the lack of attention to what's established. Cooper tells the Czar that back when he was in the army, to measure how bad a bomb is, to do a thumbs up, and if it's smaller than a thumb, then to head for the hills, and if bigger, to not even bother. Ginny asks if he thinks the war is going to happen, with Cooper replying that he hopes not. I also really hope the show doesn't establish later on that he knows for a fact that it will, but just decide not to do anything about it. Cooper heads aside to snatch Ginny a piece of cake, and while she is waiting outside, a massive flash happens out of nowhere, and somehow no one besides Ginny doesn't notice it. She's somehow not blinded by it as well, even though it's very much a thing that would happen if a nuclear explosion happens right outside. But this show does demonstrate that it doesn't really understand how nukes work. It seems like as though it only used Fallout 4's research as to how nukes worked, since in the beginning of that game, a nuke goes off pretty much right in front of the main characters of the game, but yet they're not blinded by it as well, so we're already off to a good start. Cooper first thinks for some reason that what Jenny's looking at is a fire. When it starts to get bigger, he knows what's up. The shockwave from the explosion finally reaches the house, somehow taking far longer than what it normally does take for that to happen, but whatever. Once again, this show just clearly does not know how nukes work. Well, it doesn't know how law stuff works, so I suppose the show says prepping us for its blatant stupidity. So we have the inevitable people frantically running for their lives, trying to find cover and shelter, with Spencer not allowing his friend inside the bunker with his family. Cooper and his daughter grab their horse and start to make a run for it. A series of explosions happen, and the two of them should most certainly be dead, because if you take a look at this picture, you can see they're not that far away from the last nuke, so there's no hope for them to be alive. Granted, we don't see Ginny at all in the events of the show that take place after this flashback, but since Cooper is still alive, it does open that possibility, so we're just going to have to speculate until Season 2 comes along. So we've already come across a lot of problems with this opening. Yeah, I've seen people claim this opening is perfect. Yeah, you can kiss my ass on that one because it's not. Far from it. We cut to the year 2296 inside Vault 33, where we're introduced to another one of our protagonists, Lucy McLean. She explains herself by listing what she put her skill points into, such as repairing, science, history, as well as melee and ranged combat. She likes to hang out with her dad, the overseer of the vault, and she has a brother named Norman. This has a diegetic reason because she's trying to find a suitable marriage partner from Vault 32, which is right next to it, and Vault 31. This intro does an okay job at establishing that she's very skilled, but she's had to train for it. Some characters don't require that for some reason, and she's kinda naive and she's just looking for a companion. The last part is fine until you realize what they do with that later on, but for now it's totally okay. She and the rest of the vault make preparations for a wedding. Hank tells her that she looks like her mother, and it implies that she's been dead for a while ago now, and Hank recounts his experience with his marriage to Rose. He takes Lucy off to her husband-to-be, where gatekeeper Chet tries to stall the wedding by claiming there's a technical problem, which leads to this weird exchange between him and Lucy.
Messing around with your cousin, it's all well and good for kids, but it's not a sustainable long-term sexual practice, you know?
Okay, what? This isn't even the only time in this episode they make this type of joke either.
After 10 years of cousin stuff, I'm definitely excited for the real thing.
But they seriously not have enough people to have diversity? They should, because vaults were designed to have enough people to avoid that problem, so I don't see why that would be an issue. So not only are these jokes not honestly particularly funny, they also cause some head scratchers when it comes to world building of the vaults. Overseer Lee Moldaver introduces herself as being the new Vault 32 Overseer, which is basically like the mayor of the vaults. So the vaults apparently, despite being close to each other, only communicate with terminals, which I don't have an issue with, since the vaults in Fallout also are secretly social experiments to test the resolve of the inhabitants to see if they are capable of happening the new world after they leave the vaults. Later games kinda screw us up by having them also be scientific experiments, but so far this seems in line with established 1 and 2. Not so much later on, but as Mr. Incredible What said,
"We get there when we get there!"
Lucy's introduced her husband Monty, who kinda looks like Leon Kennedy for some reason. At the party, she asks for a sperm count while they're eating. Why would you ask that at this point in time instead of after when you're done eating food? And that's kind of gross, and I get that she's naive and all, but even she should know that this isn't exactly an appropriate subject to be brought up at this point in time. So far, I think you're sensing the power of the show's humor, and it's only going to get worse from here. Speaking of getting worse from here, I also want to talk about the show's soundtrack. During this scene, they play the old 50s type of music that you can play in the games, which I wouldn't mind if they did it sparingly, but the problem quickly arises once you realize how often they play it, because it's almost non-stop. This is already the third or fourth song they play at this point alone, and there's still a few more to come. Once again, this isn't bad in moderation. You can use it as either a stylistic choice, kind of like how in the old Fallouts, where one old song would play in the intros and credits, to work pretty well, especially in Fallout 1, where you have the juxtaposition of the Vault Dweller being exiled from his vault with the music playing as he leaves, because it creates a memorable moment that resonates with those who have played it to this day. And the song Maybe by the Ink Spots complements it well, since it's about the narrator being forgotten or being replaced by somebody else, which complements the dour tone that the game ends on. Or in Guardians of the Galaxy, where the songs are an important part of Peter's character because they relate not only to his time on Earth, but also his mother, which are some of his most cherished memories, which builds his character in all the movies that he's in. On this show, it just plays it all the time, diegetic or not. It gets to be very grating on how it plays just when transitioning to a new scene, and I hate it. Hank gives his speech about how Lucy and Monty's children are going to be part of the generation to leave the vault to colonize the world, and Monty wants to be escorted to his new home. Lucy obliges, and they start to get really horny with more licensed music playing, while Norm enters Vault 32 and sees the crops which Moldaver claims a blight happened, which caused several people to die from starvation. As he digs deeper, he sees skeletons of the inhabitants, and the place has apparently been ransacked, causing him to flee back to Vault 33. Lucy hears the sound coming from her Pip-Boy, she puts it on, and the Geiger counter starts to go crazy, and she immediately comes to the conclusion that he's a raider. First off, how does Lucy know about raiders? Why would that be her immediate assumption? Second of all, how does none of the other Vault 33 inhabitants not notice this as well? They all have Pip-Boys, so why is Lucy's the only one to go off? Do none of the others have Geiger counters? That's stupid. Third, if Monty has this much radiation, how is he not sick? He appears to be healthy, even though he has a very high amount. Lucy gets sick from a similar amount later on, so why is this guy up and healthy on his feet? Even if he used either Rad-X or Radaway, he shouldn't have this large amount. Ultimately, this makes no sense, and it leads to some pretty huge problems. This revelation leads to Monty attacking Lucy, even stabbing her in the lower left stomach, and trying to strangle her until he's distracted by the alarm. Lucy takes a picture, smashing him with his face and slitting his throat. We'll be getting back to this in a second. Lucy takes the knife out, which you're not supposed to do when stabbed or impaled, but whatever. She takes a stim pack and heals herself with it. That's not how stim packs work in lore. Sure, that is a gameplay thing necessary for the player, but in universe, the stim packs just simply enhance their user's bodily functions, but they're not an outright health regenerator. Lucy leaves her room with a tranquilizer gun, starts using it on raiders. I find this strange because these have never been in the series before, especially not in vaults, which make me wonder why they haven't been seen before now. Like in Fallout 3, where it been very beneficial for the guards to use it to capture the Lone Wanderer instead of using live ammo. Speaking of live ammo, the raiders managed to break into the vault's armory, and they basically have no security, I guess. Only one guy was there, and there was no locks or codes needed to access them. Wow, what great security! More fighting ensues between the raiders and vault dwellers, and while this is happening, more classic music starts to play, which is very tone-deaf considering that the people are being brutally killed, but yet this whimsical music is bursting from the background. Also, there's this one guy who looks like Andrew Tate for some reason.
You're broke! You're fucking poor!
Adding to the total conflict, the fat council member tells these two people to get the jelly mold out of there! Instead of, getting themselves to safety, and they die, so thanks for that. Steph gets stabbed in the eye when she fights a raider for killing her husband. The Andrew Tate guy gets off some jet, attempting to attack Chet, but a guard trips him up, causing Chet's cord to get unplugged, and the door closes, cutting the guy in half. So there's this one guard here, where are the others? We see in Fallout 3 that guards have security forces, which makes sense and is actually a good addition that game makes to world building, but where are the other guards when the alarm has been tripped? Wouldn't it just suck if they were established later on that there are more guards with guns in this vault, but they didn't do anything? That would just be awful, wouldn't it? Remember what I said about a minute ago about remembering Monty? Well, Lucy takes Norm to safety and Monty shows back up. Yep, somehow he's still alive even after having his throat slit. If you take a look at this image, you can clearly see that the picture is clearly placed on Monty's throat, but somehow most of the damage appears to be on the right side of his face. This is a blatant continuity error if I've even seen one, and this isn't even the only example. Earlier when there's this dying raider, he's shooting his gun upwards, but it somehow hits his buddy even though it's shooting in the air. Who approved this? How did it get past the editors and screen testers? Yet people claim the show is a 10 out of 10, when so far it's at best half of that. Hank shows up and drowns Monty in a barrel of pickles, which must hurt pretty bad with all the vinegar being splashed on his open wounds. Another alarm goes off, alerting that the inner vault door has been opened, and Hank goes to check it out and finds multiple vault dwellers being taken hostage, and the bomb being placed right next to him. Lucy shows up and Moldaver makes an ultimatum to have Hank choose between the vault dwellers or Lucy. Hank locks Lucy in his closet, telling her that she is his world, and he allows himself to be taken by the raiders and they leave. Not without Moldaver telling Lucy that she looks like her mother. She activates the bomb, but for some reason the hostages are given enough time to run away and escape from the blast, and the bomb doesn't cause any long-lasting damage, so it was completely pointless. We're now introduced to our other main character of the show, Maximus, who I'm simply going to refer to as Max for the rest of this review. He's an initiate in the Brotherhood of Steel, who have been in the Fallout series since the first game. For the uninitiated, the Brotherhood are this splinter faction from the US military when General Roger Maxson discovered the unethical experiments the government were commencing at the Mariposa military base with the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV for short. After surviving the war, both the garrison under his command and their families formed the Brotherhood to scavenge advanced technology in order to prevent another cataclysm like the Great War from happening ever again. They're isolationists, which ends up being detrimental to them in Fallout 2 and New Vegas because of their low numbers and inability to adapt to the times. That's how they're supposed to be, but in typical Bethesda fashion, they ruined them and just changed them to fit in whatever story they're telling at the moment. But I'll elaborate more as we continue because man oh man, are they done dirty in this show. Max is getting bullied by his peers with more music playing. I swear, this show is honestly just as bad, if not worse, when it comes to licensed music as, well, I can't say a first word because YouTube guideline reasons, Task Force X 2016. Max's one friend Dane helps him get back up, and later on they attend this class where Cleric Felix reminds them that the purpose of the Brotherhood is what I described earlier, so no need to reiterate that. But at least on this front, the show does get that right, so I'll give it props to that. That gets taken away though with the introduction of the Cleric. The Brotherhood in this show seem to have this religious undertones to them, and their hierarchy seems to be dominated by these clerics now, instead of the elders, just like what we've seen before, and the show doesn't really explain why this is the case now. You could make the case that they're kinda like cultists in the sense of how obsessed they are with following their codex and collecting technology, but they've never worshipped it. They just want to prevent man from using it to destroy themselves like before. They never had this before, so what's causing all of this now? The Krillin shows up, which is the same ship that the Brotherhood used as their mobile base of Fallout 4, so I guess that means either the Minutemen or Brotherhood ending of that game must be canon, because this is confirmed to be the same airship and not another one. A squad of Brotherhood paladins march toward the base, prompting Max to wonder why they're there. Now I gotta say, the armor in the show looks amazing.
Hey, that's pretty good.
The fact that they're practical is awesome, and they look really accurate. Once again, the prop designers for the show weren't messing around. Danny pulls Max away from his job to take a peek at the armor, and this prompts Max's flashback where he first saw the paladin. And don't worry if you missed this one, because we see it like another 4 or 5 times this show, because it doesn't think you can remember anything that happened earlier than like 5 minutes ago. We get this weird bit of world building with the cadets throw bricks at these basketball goals, which I would think is a very obvious safety hazard, and why don't you just play with balls or anything like that, considering that they're pretty well off so far, since we see that they have the means to feed themselves, as well as maintain their health, cleanliness, and hygiene, but they just don't have any balls for some reason. Dane and several of the others are celebrating that Dane's going to the wilds, and we see later that this upsets Max to the point where he shouts in rage and breaks a toilet stall, but this somehow doesn't alert everybody else, even though he isn't exactly being very quiet.
Hang in there, Squidward. It's all part of the job.
Next morning, Max and the others in his tent are awakened by Dane screaming in pain to having their foot cut by a razor blade inside a boot, and credit to the actor, your action is pretty convincing and well performed. But for whatever reason, they suspect Max of perpetrating it and no one else. Why? He was the only one that tried to help them at all, and no one else tried to help, and if he was the only one to do it, Why would he help Dane when that could expose him? And no one heard Max yelling, as I said earlier, so what makes Max the primary suspect? They put a sack on his head and they escort him to a plane to interrogate him. Cut back to Vault 33. The survivors start to clean up the mess, including all the dead, and tend to the wounded. Lucy makes a proposal to the assembly to have a search party look for her dad. They refuse, only to go to blindly into the dangers of the wasteland, claiming that their main priority is to maintain the security of the vault. Norman tells Lucy that they just don't want to find Hank because that means they won't be able to be in charge. Lucy is unwilling to accept this, so she, Norm, and Chet hatch a plan to get her out of the vault to look for Dad herself. They make it to the outer door, and Chet tries to convince her to let him go with her, but she refuses to let anyone else get hurt, forcing Lucy to trank him unconscious. She closes the bridge and opens the door to dismay the others. She begins her trek across the wasteland, walking past skeletons and people who are fossilized into stone statues, which isn't how that works. She glances at the Santa Monica Pier, vowing to her dad to rescue him. I mostly don't have a problem with this on its own, outside the people being stone statues thing, as well as another bit that I'm about to explain in a bit. My main issue with this, however, is this is just like the other games. This setup is literally Fallout 3, 4, and 76 all over again. In 3 and 4, the main setup for the main story is to find your missing loved one. First it was your dad, and second was your son. And in 76, you have to find the missing overseer. So I think you know what I'm getting at. The plotline for this show is just the same Bethesda Fallout crap all over again. It's not even taking into some of the game's DLC into consideration, such as Point Lookout in 3 and Far Harbor in 4, where the main goal is to find someone else's missing loved ones, and in both cases, it's their daughters. It's so mind-boggling repetitive that the main goal for at least every major Fallout story in the past 15 years has been this so freaking much. Enough is enough! This is a clear demonstration of how not only is there a very clear lack of creativity, but also the show has taken far more inspiration from the Bethesda side of things and not the actual good Fallouts. And this is going to come back to bite the show in the ass throughout the entire runtime. So I think you can start to understand my issues with how this franchise is being run ever since it was bought from the original creators. But if you don't understand it quite yet, I have plenty more to talk about, because this is only the beginning. We can clearly tell that the vaults are in Los Angeles, which presents a pretty big issue. In the original game, the main antagonistic force were super mutants led by Richard Gray, the master of the mutants. The main ticking clock element of the second half of the game's story is trying to stop them before they find Vault 13. That's because they need to capture the inhabitants of the vaults, since they don't have any radiation exposure, so when they return to super mutants, they will retain their intelligence just like the first lieutenant. Since for those who have been exposed to radiation for a large amount of time, they turn out to be the dumb super mutants, like Harry. Want to know where the Master's location is? The Boneyard in Los Angeles. So that means that despite being pretty much right next to the Master's own base, he or any of his forces somehow completely missed several vaults full of people right for the taking. So this part of the show shouldn't even be happening right now if they didn't decide to make the Master into a stupid idiot. Wow, such really good writing. Inside the plane we saw earlier, the knight takes the sack on Max's head and the squad begins its interrogation. The cleric tells Max that they gave him his name, a place to belong in the Brotherhood, and he asks why Max decided to join them. We get another flashback scene, but this time it's of Max coming out of a refrigerator. Yes, they really just reference a kid in the fridge for Fallout 4. You know, that quest that everyone just loves and it totally makes sense and it doesn't break any lore? Man, I love being reminded of that. The cleric claims that the other recruits claimed it was Max. Not sure why they would think that, since for all I know, Dane is his only friend and he was the only one that went to help them and no one else did. Max denies any involvement, and while this is going on, the knight is walking behind them and orders them to speak, trying to be like Batman the interrogation scene in The Dark Knight.
Speak.
Yeah, this is what the Brotherhood paladins sound like now. At this point, you might guess this is not how it was like before, and you'll be absolutely correct.
Elder Maxon, I have a set of plans to build a signal interceptor to get me inside the Institute.
All clear, Sentinel. 5 mutants released from their torment, the rest are keeping their heads down.
Don't worry, I'm going to go more in depth on this in the next 2 episodes and why they decided to add this, since it's very apparent starting with episode 3. Then Max says this.
I didn't do it. I did not. I wanted it to happen. Is that wrong?
There were so many levels of what the fuckery.
Why would you say that? You're just making yourself more suspicious by saying this. Oh yeah, I didn't murder my neighbor the other day, but I wanted it to happen. Like, what? This is so dumb! The cleric even says that attacking a member of the Brotherhood is a sign of weakness, so this is very obviously not a very good thing to say, and when asked if he has anything else to say in his own defense, Max thanks the cleric for giving him his place in the world and that he'll do anything for the Brotherhood, even giving his own life for them. And that's apparently good enough for the cleric to promote Max to Squire from Knight Titus. As after just admitting that he wanted Dane to get hurt so he could get promoted, he gets promoted just because he spouted some flowery language to suck off the cleric in the Brotherhood. Max just doing whatever he wants and facing no consequences from the Brotherhood is going to be a recurring problem with the show, especially when we get to the finale. There's this scene with Dane who filed for Max and his innocence, claiming that he wouldn't hurt a fly, which also isn't a good thing to say because the Brotherhood is a military faction who requires people who are willing to kill when necessary, so saying that is kind of counterintuitive, meaning Max definitely should not be promoted to a field rank, but maybe he should just be a scribe or something like that, but I guess not. A ceremony takes place and the knight brands Max on his back with his heated hand. They've literally never done this before in any other game, so this is very out of place. I guess it can make them appear more cult-like, but I've already gone over why that is nonsense, so I'm not reiterating on that whole tangent again. In this landing pad, a group of knights and squires are gathered to be briefed on their mission to capture this Enclave scientist named Wilzig, who we'll be getting to know more in episode 2. One of the recruits asks the other if the Enclave is real, which I have a hard time believing since the Brotherhood fought the Enclave in Washington DC less than 20 years ago in-universe in Fallout 3. And even in 2, the Brotherhood was plotting against the Enclave, so how could they possibly forget about them? Some might say the guy who asked that was just an initiate who doesn't know better, but we clearly see that the initiates are being educated, which I would imagine they would also be taught history, considering all the factions that the Brotherhood has come across and have been in conflict with. This is basically like how in Disney Star Wars, people have just forgotten the Jedi and believing that Luke is just a myth, even though it's only been 30 years, and they're aware of other stuff that's happened at the time, so this isn't boasting too much confidence in me that the show is very well written. And this is just episode 1. I'll be talking about the Enclave in the next episode, so just wait for that if you're curious. So this Wilzig has this valuable object that can be used to either endanger or save the nation, so it's a very high priority. And he has a dog with him too. Just thought I would throw it in. The teams board the vertebrates and head out to hunt the target, bringing it into the Max/Brotherhood side of this episode. Later on that night, we see this cowboy guy being taken out by these other cowboy guys with a junk jet. How do they have this? The junk jet was a one-of-a-kind item, especially made in the Massachusetts Commonwealth. So houses all the way in California, or at least somewhere in the west coast of the US. So these guys break into the fortress. The leader, Honcho, says that Don Pedro digs this guy out once a year, cuts up some pieces, and puts him back into the ground. They find this grave where this cross that has some IV medical bags attached to it. At first, the lackeys think that this guy they're referring to is a mutant, but Honcho says he's not, and that his pops worked with him once, indicating this guy is very old. The other has out they don't know this guy is feral, and the leader presents this chicken in a cage, which he claims that the guy will attack first if he is feral, and they'll just kill him if he is. So for the Fallout fans out there, they're clearly referring to a ghoul. What I don't get is that if he's feral, why would he attack the chicken first? Feral ghouls basically act like zombies, in which they attack any living thing that's close to them, so why would he go for the chicken first and not them? They've never been shown to just attack animals first, and it's very easy to tell if a ghoul is feral anyway, so if he is, just kill him. Why go this complicated plan with the chicken? That just makes no sense. They dig up the coffin and open it, they brace themselves for who or what's going to come out of the box, and it's a ghoul who is not feral. So good for them, I guess, but how is this guy still alive? And how has he not been feral if he's been isolated for so long? That's how ghouls tend to become insane and eventually feral. The show screws up later, but that's another conversation. Does this guy not require food or water? Ghouls have been shown to need substance before. Well, except when they don't. Oh my god, Kid Approach is so stupid. This ghoul is Cooper Howard, the same guy we saw in the opening scene who survived the war and is ghoulified. He starts talking and picks up the chicken. Honcho informs him about the bounty on Wilzig and that he's running to Moldaver. Honcho tells Cooper, I know he's referred to as the Ghoul by the show, but I'm still just going to call him by his name. If you want me to change that, let me know. Wilzig is heading to his observatory in California, where Cooper's originally from, which causes Cooper to get on edge with how this random guy knows that. but Honcho gets tested and threatens to put him back in his coffin, which leads to this action scene where Cooper kills the others in a gory fashion, just like in the games, which is something I appreciate since Fall is known for having violence, and this show does understand that, which does leave some pretty entertaining moments, but that's just superficial stuff. The Ghoul pushes the coffin, which is tied to Honcho, and he falls into the grave where we get an immediately cool final line to end the episode.
Well, you know what they say. Us cowpokes, we take it as it comes.
I have a feeling this guy's gonna be the best part, isn't he? So, that was episode 1. And as you can see, I'm not exactly impressed with the show beyond the production value. And sure, the acting is obviously pretty good, especially from Walter Goggins as Cooper, but the writing, yikes. And this is only going to get worse. So far, this episode is mostly just setup, which is what most first episodes of TV shows do, so I'm not going to hold that against it, but due to how contrived and nonsensical several parts already are, I'm not feeling very good about this. The script is already 10 pages long, and this is on just this episode alone. So just imagine how long this will be for writing for every single one, which is why I think I'm cutting this off for now, because I originally planned for this to be one big video, but there's so much to talk about. I think it's for the best to make this into a series, breaking down each episode individually, because that's just like how I like to do things, and once I'm finished with this, I'll get started on episode 2. And having to do this in more bite-sized chunks will make it a lot easier to write, edit, record, etc. Now, I've tried to have these released on a semi-frequent basis. Well, I think that's all for now, and I'll see you next time.